Welcome back, everyone, to Boss Economics World, the channel where we peel back the glossy veneer of official government statements to expose the economic truths beneath. Today, we're diving deep into Thailand's renewed sprint toward a free trade agreement, FTA, with the European Union. Behind the seemingly innocuous headlines lies a labyrinth of geopolitical maneuvering, economic vulnerabilities, and, yes, government blunders that have led many to question if our policymakers are steering this ship into stormy waters, if not straight into an iceberg. Thailand's Commerce Minister, Pichai Naripthapan, recently announced that Bangkok is pushing hard to wrap up talks with the EU by the end of this year. This move is not merely about expanding trade, it's positioned as a critical step toward building economic security amid an increasingly turbulent global economic climate. As you may recall, the EU suspended these negotiations in the wake of Thailand's 2014 military coup, a decision that underscored concerns about political legitimacy and governance. Now, with renewed talks in 2023 and more FTAs already on the horizon, including those with the European Free Trade Association, the United Arab Emirates, Bhutan, Turkey, and Pakistan, one has to wonder, is Thailand truly committed to smart economic reform, or is it just scrambling to patch up a slipping economic boat? Let's put this in perspective. Exports account for nearly 60% of Thailand's gross domestic product. That's an enormous dependence on external markets. Last year, the country ran a widening trade surplus with the United States of about $35 billion. While a surplus might seem like a golden ticket, it paradoxically paints a target on Thailand's back. The Trump-era tariff blitz isn't a relic of the past, it remains an ever-looming threat. With over $55 billion in annual exports to the US hanging in the balance, Thailand is essentially living on economic fumes, hoping that the next tariff snare won't be their downfall. Critics, and rightly so, view this as a classic case of economic mismanagement, where political blind spots and short-term decision-making create vulnerabilities that any savvy economist would recognize as ticking time bombs. It's as if Thailand's policymakers have sat back and said, why diversify when you can double down on a single market? The consequences of such a strategy, particularly in an era marked by protectionism and unpredictable policy shifts, could be devastating. At its core, the push for an EU FTA is about gaining leverage and reducing geopolitical risk. One might argue that aligning more closely with Europe is a wise hedge against US protectionist policies. But let's not kid ourselves, the reality is far murkier. The global trade environment is in the midst of dramatic shifts. For example, according to the latest World Trade Organization, WTO, reports, global FDI flows have taken a hit of nearly 30% over the last 2 years, largely due to geopolitical tensions and supply chain disruptions. Thailand, for all its export prowess, finds itself caught in this turbulent sea, with every new tariff threat acting like a potential iceberg ready to sink the vessel. Remember, while the US's trade policy under the previous administration was heavily focused on America First, current signals from Washington under the Biden administration remain ambiguous. There's talk of support for free trade in principle, but reality on the ground still hints at protectionism. For Thailand, this ambiguity isn't comforting, it's a stark reminder that relying on an unpredictable partner is a gamble with the national economy at stake. The European Union, Thailand's fourth-largest trading partner, offers a seemingly stable alternative. But as we know, Europe is not without its own set of demands. The FTA negotiations resumed only after years of diplomatic sidelining post-2014 coup. Europe's insistence on certain governance and human rights standards often serves as a litmus test for political reform. In some sense, Thailand's eagerness to finalize an agreement by Christmas, with a fifth round of talks lined up for March, is not just about securing market access, it's also an attempt to clean up its international image. Is it genuine reform, or a cosmetic change aimed at placating external pressures? One has to laugh at the sheer irony here. The very government that allowed a military coup in 2014 is now scrambling to prove its credibility on the global stage through trade deals. It's a bit like a cheater trying to win a sports tournament by signing up with a prestigious club at the last minute. The symbolism is lost on no one, and it raises the question of whether these FTAs are a panacea for systemic economic issues or merely a bandage applied to cover deeper, more pernicious wounds. Let's talk numbers. Recent data from the Bank of Thailand reveals that any potential imposition of US tariffs could shrink export revenues by an estimated 3 to 4% this fiscal year, roughly translating into billions in lost revenue. Moreover, unpublished internal forecasts from several independent financial institutions warn that failing to secure robust FTAs could result in a domino effect, reduced foreign direct investment, depressed consumer confidence, and even a dip in the value of the baht. In a world where a currency's stability is a bellwether of national economic health, these risks are too significant to ignore. Furthermore, the EU's market, with its 450 million consumers, offers enormous potential. Yet, the negotiation process is fraught with challenges. Brussels isn't keen on shaking hands with governments that overlook democratic norms. It's a delicate dance. Thailand must balance its desire for economic security with the need to modernize its political institutions. And if history is any guide, the outcome is anything but guaranteed. Economists often point to cases like South Korea and Japan, which have successfully navigated the treacherous waters of global trade by diversifying their economic partnerships. In contrast, Thailand's heavy reliance on traditional markets exposes it to significant shocks. For instance, consider that South Korea's aggressive pursuit of multiple FTAs, including deals with ASEAN, the EU, and even de facto alliances with the US, has insulated it from single-market dependencies. Thailand, meanwhile, seems to be operating on the assumption that, if you can't beat them, join them, but the stakes here are monumentally higher. Look at Mexico, another export-reliant economy. Despite NAFTA's successes, Mexico has had to wrestle with new trade agreements and renegotiations to maintain its competitive edge amid rising US protectionism. And if Mexico isn't immune to these challenges, what does that suggest about Thailand's prospects? Clearly, the lesson here is that economic security demands more than opportunistic FTAs, it requires a comprehensive, long-term strategy that addresses structural vulnerabilities, something that seems to be conspicuously absent in Bangkok's playbook. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter, government management and its role in catalyzing or mitigating economic downturns. For too long, Thailand's policy decisions have been reactionary, driven by political expediency rather than sound, forward-thinking economic strategy. The current gamble to finalize the EU FTA is, in many ways, a desperate attempt to mitigate past missteps and stave off the looming menace of a recession. Experts have repeatedly highlighted that the Thai economy's over-reliance on exports, coupled with a sluggish pace of domestic innovation and a lack of significant investment in education and infrastructure, sets the stage for broader economic instability. It's not just about dodging tariffs, it's a signal that fundamental economic reform is urgently needed. A recent study by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, warned that countries with similar profiles, heavy export reliance, narrow economic bases, are more susceptible to global shocks. And let's not forget that while some policymakers claim that FTAs will build economic security, the reality is that without meaningful internal reforms, these deals merely shift the risk elsewhere. Consider the example of Greece during the Eurozone crisis, a nation that, despite its geographic and economic advantages, was brought to its knees by decades of mismanagement and over-reliance on external financing. While Thailand's situation is different in magnitude, the underlying principle remains the same: reliance on external factors without robust domestic foundations is a recipe for disaster. In an era marked by protectionism, trade wars, and the lingering aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic, no country is immune from the ripple effects of global economic shifts. The recent collapse of Lehman Brothers and other financial mishaps have taught us that even seemingly robust economies can descend into chaos if they fail to adapt. Thailand, with its precarious export dependence and precarious political history, finds itself on a tightrope. Every misstep, from delayed negotiations to misaligned policies, could have far-reaching repercussions. Beyond the immediate threat of US tariffs, there is the broader question of how Thailand's economic strategy fits into the complex puzzle of 21st-century global trade. The world is rapidly changing. Digital economies, environmental policies, and geopolitical alliances will redefine trade rules in the coming decades. Countries that invest in technology, education, and resilient infrastructure will be the true winners. Sadly, the current trajectory of Thailand's economic policies suggests an unwillingness or inability to grasp the full scope of these transformations. So, what's the takeaway from this rather chaotic spectacle? It's a cautionary tale, a reminder that governments must plan for the long haul rather than hitching their hopes on a single free trade agreement. Thailand's renewed enthusiasm for an EU deal is, on paper, a smart move to diversify its markets and mitigate the risks from unpredictable US tariffs. But dig deeper, and you find a strategy that's more reactive than proactive, more cosmetic than structural. Imagine putting a fresh coat of paint on a leaky ship and expecting it to sail smoothly through a hurricane. That, dear viewers, is the crux of Thailand's predicament. The government's reliance on FTAs as an economic lifeline is laughably short-sighted if not accompanied by substantive internal reforms, in areas like diversification, fostering innovation, and enhancing domestic productivity. As governments around the world increasingly lean on protectionist policies and global trade rules become ever more convoluted, the need for a resilient and dynamic economy has never been more urgent. We must ask ourselves, is Thailand's leadership ready to confront these hard truths? Or will political considerations continue to override the necessity for comprehensive economic reform? The answer, unfortunately, seems to lie somewhere in the gray area of political expediency. It might be time to stop treating FTAs as a magic cure-all and start focusing on long-term strategies that build the pillars of sustainable growth. In closing, while Thailand's renewed push for an EU FTA might temporarily bolster trade and create a veneer of economic security, it is, at its core, a bandage over deeper, systemic issues. With overdependence on exports, vulnerability to geopolitical shifts, and a history of reactionary policies, Thailand's economic future remains anything but certain. The coming months will be critical, both in the negotiation rooms of the EU and in the broader international trading arena. The stakes are high, and the outcomes will serve as a stark reminder of the perils of complacency in an increasingly unpredictable global economy. As always, at Boss Economics World, we're here to peel back the layers and lay bare the economic realities often hidden behind political rhetoric. Stay tuned, stay informed, and remember, only by addressing the underlying issues can we hope to steer away from another devastating recession. This is your host signing off, but not before urging all stakeholders to demand more than superficial fixes. It's time to build a resilient economic future that isn't at the mercy of unpredictable tariffs, political miscalculations, or short-term gains. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your wallets ready for the economic roller coaster that awaits us all.